The wind cut across the hillside like a blade, carrying with it the dry scent of winter grass and the faint tang of rust from the leaning cemetery gate. Malik knelt on the hard earth, knees pressing into frozen soil. His hands rested on the crooked headstone, a cheap slab of gray granite no taller than his shin. Lichen clung to its edges, as if trying to keep it from disappearing into the dirt. No name was etched in gold. No flowers. Just John Ellis, 1956 to 1990, the years of a life reduced to stone and silence. Malik's breath fogged in the air. "Hey, Pop," he murmured. The words felt small against the sweep of the sky. This place had always been quiet, but the silence now carried weight. The old oak at the far edge of the lot groaned against the wind, branches stripped bare, roots pushing against the graves. The rest of the cemetery was scattered with stones that leaned like tired men. His father's was the most neglected. 35 years had put lines on Malik's face, but here he felt 10 again, barefoot, standing in the rain beside this same grave, gripping his mother's hand as the preacher hurried through a service no one seemed eager to attend. That day, he noticed the other men in the crowd, all dressed in black suits that looked expensive, all standing apart from him. His brothers, half-brothers, the term whispered in the family, though to Malik it had always felt like a warning. He saw them only once more after the funeral years later on the news, smiling beside ribbon cuttings and charity galas. Their lives glittered under city lights. His stayed tethered to cracked sidewalks and part-time jobs. Malik traced the grooves in the stone. The wind shifted, colder now, and he remembered the night his father died. The police report said accidental, but the neighbors had said targeted. A black man found dead after a dispute with a local business owner, one who happened to be white and connected. No charges, no investigation, just another name dropped quietly into the ground. He swallowed hard. "They forgot you, Pop," he said, voice rough. "But I didn't." The hill rolled away into the distance, fields stretching out in muted brown. Beyond them, the faint shimmer of the highway carried the hum of trucks headed toward the city. Somewhere along that road were the towers his brothers owned, their offices filled with glass, their accounts fat with the fortune built in part by the man buried here. Malik stood slowly, brushing dirt from his jeans. His joints ached from the cold. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wilted bundle of chrysanthemums, placing them at the base of the headstone. The wind caught one petal and carried it off, tumbling toward the gate. He stared down at the grave one last time, the air sharp in his lungs. A prickle of unease slid down his spine. Something about the earth here looked disturbed, as if the ground had shifted. He told himself it was just frost heave from the season. Still, as he turned toward the gravel path leading back to his truck, he couldn't shake the sense that the grave wouldn't be the same the next time he came. And he would be back soon. The drive back from the hillside was long and flat, the fields giving way to tired rows of houses and boarded-up shops. Malik's truck rattled over potholes, his mind still circling the disturbed earth at his father's grave. By the time he reached his apartment, the winter light had already drained from the sky. He set his keys on the counter, meaning to brew coffee, when the phone rang. The screen lit up with a number he hadn't seen in years. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello," a woman's voice, sharp and breathless. "Malik? Lord, I'm glad you picked up." He blinked. "Aunt Laverne." "Yes, baby. It's me." There was a pause, the faint hum of traffic behind her. "I don't know how to tell you this, but they took the stone." Malik frowned. "What stone?" "Your daddy's. The headstone. It's gone." Her voice cracked, like he never existed. The words landed heavy. He gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean, gone? Who would?" "They came in the night. 2 men in city uniforms, or so they said. I saw them load it into a truck. Said they had orders from up top. Wouldn't give names. Just drove off." Laverne's breathing was uneven, like she'd hurried to make the call. "I thought you should know before you hear it from someone else." Malik's stomach nodded. His father had already been erased from life, piece by piece, through silence and omission. Now even the stone that marked him had been taken. Why would the city care about a grave on a hill no one visits? Sometimes, she said slowly, they care when there's land involved, or when someone with money decides they want it. The air in Malik's kitchen felt tight. He sank into a chair, staring at the cracked linoleum. He could still see the crooked stone from that morning, the frost clinging to its edges. When? 3 nights ago. I wanted to call sooner, but Laverne's voice faltered. They told me to mind my business. He closed his eyes. You think this has to do with them? With my brothers? I don't know. But you know how things work here, Malik. People with power don't like loose ends. And your daddy's name, well, some folks would prefer it buried deeper than any grave. A long silence stretched between them. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Malik pictured Darius and Claude in their expensive suits, smiling for cameras, while the last trace of their father was quietly hauled away. I can't just let it go, he said finally. I didn't think you would. Her tone softened. But be careful, baby. You start digging, you might find things you can't put back. I've been living with things I can't put back my whole life, Malik replied. His voice was low, steady. I'll be in the city soon. There was a faint exhale from her end. Then I'll be here. And Malik, you're not alone in this, even if it feels like it. He hung up and sat in the dim kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The knot in his chest tightened, not just from anger but from the old wound of being the one left behind. Questions pressed in. Why now? Why the stone? Why after all these years? He reached for a notepad and began scribbling names, dates, places. The page filled quickly, lines cutting across each other like a map to something he wasn't sure he wanted to find. Through the window, the city lights blinked faintly in the distance, cold and unreachable. He stared at them until they blurred, knowing that tomorrow, he'd drive straight toward them. The next morning, Malik's truck merged into the endless stream of cars headed toward the city. The skyline rose slowly from the haze, all glass and steel, a place that had always felt like someone else's home. He kept replaying Aunt Laverne's voice in his mind. They took the stone, like he never existed. By the time he parked near the public library, the streets were already awake. Buses sighing at every corner, vendors shouting over the honk of taxis, and a cold wind funneling between tall buildings. Malik had no appointment, no contacts here, just questions. Inside, the library's warmth smelled faintly of paper and dust. He logged onto a public computer, fingers clumsy from the cold, and typed in his brothers' names. Darius Ellis and Claude Ellis. The search returned headlines that read like coronations. Ellis Group announces record profits, CEO Darius Ellis credits, Bold Vision philanthropist Claude Ellis donates $5 million to City Arts Fund. Every article was accompanied by smiling portraits, perfect suits, diamond cufflinks, the practiced confidence of men who had never been told no. Malik clicked deeper, tracing the history of the Ellis Group. The company had been family-owned for 40 years, built on logistics contracts, land acquisitions, and city development deals. The records blurred together until he found a scanned newspaper clipping from 1990, the year his father died. Founder John Ellis passes away. Company to be led by sons Darius and Claude Ellis. No mention of Malik, not even in the obituary. He scrolled further and found corporate filings. An updated will, signed weeks before his father's death, naming only Darius and Claude as beneficiaries. Malik's stomach tightened. He knew his father wasn't a man of lawyers and loopholes. Someone had helped make this happen. Banks had extended massive lines of credit to the Ellis brothers in the years that followed. Terms far too generous for men in their 20s with little business history. Malik recognized some of the bank names. They were the same institutions that had denied his loan applications without even glancing past his surname. Racism here wasn't the kind you could point at and name. It was baked into paperwork, handshakes, and the polite language of risk assessment. His brothers had inherited not just money but a system tilted in their favor, while Malik had inherited silence. A voice behind him interrupted his thoughts. You know them. Malik turned. The man was middle-aged, wearing a threadbare coat and pushing a mop. They're my brothers, Malik said carefully. The man's eyebrows lifted. Rich brothers to have. Own half the trucks in the state. He shook his head. City loves them. Sponsors every parade, every fundraiser. People forget who built the first business. People forget a lot. Malik glanced back at the screen. Not if I can help it. The janitor gave a low whistle. Then you better watch yourself, son. Men with that much money don't like being reminded of the past. When Malik left the library, the air felt sharper. Billboards for Ellis Group properties towered over the streets, their glossy images showing smiling families in new homes, luxury apartments overlooking the river. He stopped at one intersection, staring at the slogan, "Building Tomorrow Together." He almost laughed at the irony. His father had built their tomorrow. Malik had been left out of it entirely. A city bus roared past, carrying an ad for the upcoming Ellis Group charity gala. Darius and Claude's faces smiled down from the banner. Malik memorized the date. If he was going to find answers, he'd have to start pulling at the threads they'd worked so hard to hide. And he knew just the place to start. The date on the Ellis Group gala banner stayed in Malik's mind all night. But before he could crash their world in public, he needed proof. Something more than whispers and suspicion. Proof meant going back to where the paper trail began. That led him to a faded brass plaque on a downtown office building. Harlan and Price, attorneys at law. The glass door creaked as he pushed it open, letting in a gust of cold air. Inside smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. A receptionist glanced up, took in Malik's worn jacket, and offered a thin smile before disappearing down the hall. Minutes later, a tall, narrow man appeared, gray hair combed straight back, suit pressed with military precision. He looked older than Malik remembered, but the eyes were the same, sharp, calculating. "Malik Ellis," the man said quietly. "Haven't seen you since the service." "Mr. Harlan." Malik kept his tone flat. "I need to talk about my father's estate." Harlan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I suppose you'd better come in." The office was dim, blinds drawn against the winter sun. Stacks of files lined the walls, each labeled in neat handwriting. Harlan gestured to a leather chair. Malik sat, feeling its coldness seep through his coat. "I've been looking at the public records," Malik began. "The will, the property transfers, the timing. None of it adds up." Harlan exhaled through his nose. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Malik said slowly, "that my father didn't cut me out, that someone did it for him. And I think you know who." Silence hung heavy. The lawyer's fingers tapped lightly on the desk. "Your father's estate was handled in a different manner than most." Malik leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Harlan's eyes flicked to the blinds, then back to Malik. Public image was a factor. The transition needed to be smooth. The city was watching. "Public image?" Malik's voice sharpened. "You mean my skin? My mother's skin?" The lawyer didn't answer, which was answer enough. "There were concerns," Harlan said finally, "about perception, stability. Your brothers were positioned to maintain the company's profile. You weren't." Malik's chest burned. "Because I wasn't the right kind of Ellis for their photographs." "It wasn't my decision," Harlan said quickly. "But you should understand, this city has long memories and certain prejudices. Things get done quietly to avoid justice." Malik cut in. "To avoid justice." Harlan's hands stilled. "You want me to admit something on record?" "I can't. Not without risking more than I'm willing to give." "Then give me something off record," Malik said. "A lead, a name, anything." The lawyer hesitated, then reached for a drawer. He slid out a thin manila folder, its tab labeled in faded ink, "Property Hillside." Inside was a single photocopy. A letter from a city council office, dated 3 weeks before John Ellis's death. The letter requested expedited transfer of several rural parcels, citing urban development interests. One of those parcels matched the cemetery's address. Malik's throat tightened. They wanted the land even back then. "Some people," Harlan said softly, "don't see a cemetery, they see real estate." Malik slipped the copy into his coat. "Thanks for your honesty, Mr. Harlan. What little there was of it." The lawyer looked away. "Be careful, Malik. You're digging in places where the ground doesn't hold steady." Outside, the afternoon light was already fading, the buildings casting long, cold shadows over the street. Malik stood on the sidewalk, folder under his arm, rage humming in his veins. The letter was proof small, but enough to point him toward the next layer. If the city had plans for that hillside 30 years ago, someone on the ground today had carried them out. And Malik knew exactly where he'd find the man who tended that ground. By dawn the next morning, Malik was already heading back toward the countryside, the thin manila folder from Harlan's office resting on the passenger seat. The letter inside seemed to burn through the paper. Proof that the city had been eyeing his father's resting place long before the grave was ever dug. The highway gave way to smaller roads, then cracked lanes hemmed in by bare trees. When the hillside cemetery came into view, Malik slowed the truck and pulled into the gravel lot. The sight hit him like a fist. The headstone was gone. The chrysanthemums he'd left 2 days ago were nowhere in sight. In their place lay raw, uneven soil, dark and damp against the frost. A shallow impression marked where the stone had stood, like a pulled tooth leaving an empty socket. Malik climbed out of the truck, boots crunching over gravel. His breath clouded in front of him as he stepped closer. The ground here wasn't just disturbed. It was unsettled, like it had been done in a hurry. A voice came from behind him. "Wasn't expecting you back so soon." Malik turned to see an older man in a thick brown jacket, a wool cap pulled low. He leaned on a shovel, eyes wary. "You Jonah?" Malik asked. "That's me." The man stepped forward, gaze shifting toward the empty patch of earth. "Guess you heard." "I heard the stone's gone," Malik said. "I want to know why." Jonah sighed, rubbing a gloved hand over his jaw. "Orders from the city. Couple fellas came with a work order. Said the plot was being reassigned. My job's to keep this place in order, not ask questions." "Plot was being reassigned?" Malik's voice was tight. "It's my father's grave." "I know." Jonah's eyes softened. "John Ellis. Good man. Always tipped me a little extra when I did work for him." "Then why follow their orders?" Malik pressed. Jonah shifted uncomfortably. "Because those orders came with a badge and a clipboard. And because folks like me don't have the power to stop city men when they show up in a truck with a crane. I told them it wasn't right. They told me to mind my business if I wanted to keep my job." Malik took a slow breath, feeling his pulse in his ears. "You see where they took it?" "Loaded it up and drove toward the depot on 6th. Could be in storage, could be in a landfill. Hard to say with these people." "These people?" Malik asked. Jonah gave a bitter smile. "The ones who think history is whatever they decide to leave standing. And they've been deciding that for a long time." For a moment, neither man spoke. The wind moved through the bare branches overhead, carrying the faint rattle of the cemetery gate. "You're not the first to lose something to them," Jonah said finally. "But you might be the first who fights to get it back." Malik crouched, touching the disturbed soil. Beneath the surface, the earth was cold and wet, clinging to his fingers. "I'm not just fighting for the stone," he said. "I'm fighting for the name on it." Jonah nodded slowly. "Then you'll need more than a shovel." Malik stood, brushing the dirt from his hands. "I've got more than a shovel." He patted the folder in his coat pocket. Jonah studied him for a moment, then jerked his chin toward the truck. "If you're going after them, you better start soon. City men don't leave loose ends lying around." Malik glanced once more at the bare patch of ground, then turned toward the road. The wind at his back felt colder now, sharper. The next time he came here, he decided it would be with the people responsible standing in front of him, and nowhere to run. The drive back into the city felt shorter than it should have. Rage had a way of eating up distance. Malik barely remembered parking before he was standing on the sidewalk, staring up at the Ellis Group headquarters, 30 stories of mirrored glass, catching the winter sun like a blade. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and a waterfall wall. A receptionist in a navy blazer looked up from her desk. Can I help you, sir? Tell Darius and Claude Ellis their brother's here to see them, Malik said, voice steady but tight. Her eyes flickered, a flash of something unreadable. Do you have an appointment? They'll want to see me. She hesitated, then picked up the phone. Moments later, two suited men appeared from the elevator. Not his brother's security. They flanked him all the way up, silent but watchful. The executive floor was all open space and glass walls, the skyline stretching beyond like a private kingdom. Malik spotted them immediately. Darius stood by a conference table, phone in hand, wearing a charcoal suit cut sharp enough to draw blood. Claude lounged near the window, espresso cup in hand, cufflinks catching the light. Darius ended his call and gave a faint, polite smile. Malik, this is unexpected. Spare me, Malik said. We need to talk about our father's grave. Claude chuckled without looking at him. You mean that little hill in the sticks? Thought you'd have moved past that by now. His tone wrapped around Malik's ears like a smirk. Still got that, what is it? Country twang? Charming. Malik stepped forward. They took the stone. City orders. You two had something to do with it. Darius spread his hands in a gesture of reason. You're making assumptions. The city's developing that area. These things happen. It's nothing personal. It's everything personal, Malik shot back. You've already erased him from your press releases, your speeches, your company history. Now you're erasing him from the ground. Claude set down his cup with deliberate care. You think this is about you? Or him? It's business, Malik. Land gets repurposed. We're building a logistics hub out there. Jobs, revenue, real things. Real things. Malik's voice rose. That's my father's grave. That's our family's blood in that soil. Darius's expression hardened, just enough to see the edge beneath the charm. Our responsibility is to the company, not to old attachments. You wouldn't understand. Wouldn't understand because I wasn't handed billions while the ink on my father's death certificate was still wet? Malik took a step closer, the air between them charged. Because I wasn't the right skin tone for your board photos? Silence hung for a beat too long. Darius's eyes narrowed. Claude's smirk faded. You should be careful what you imply, Darius said softly, menace under the calm. I'm not implying, Malik said. I'm telling you, you've been burying more than history, and I'm going to dig it all up. Claude gave a short laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. Always so dramatic. You know, little brother, sometimes letting things stay buried is the smarter play. Keeps you safe. Malik turned toward the glass wall, taking in the glittering city beyond. Safety's overrated. He looked back at them. Truth's worth more than all of this. Darius's jaw tightened. Then I suppose we'll see how far truth gets you. Malik walked out, the sound of his boots echoing down the hall. In the elevator, his reflection in the mirrored wall looked older, harder. They had given him no answers, just confirmation of what he already knew. This wasn't just about land or money. It was about power. And now it was war. The apartment felt smaller than usual when Malik stepped inside, as if the confrontation at the glass tower had followed him home and taken up space in the air. He dropped his coat onto the back of a chair and sat heavily at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the silence. The image of Claude's smirk kept replaying in his mind, along with Darius's measured voice, so calm, so certain that erasing their father was just business. Malik stared at the wall, and the wall became a canvas for memory. He saw himself at 10 years old, pressed against the doorway of a bright dining room. Laughter and silverware clinking drifted toward him. Inside, his father sat between Darius and Claude, both boys wearing matching sweaters. Malik's seat at the table was missing. When he asked, his aunt told him, "It's just a smaller gathering this year, honey. Maybe next time." Next time never came. Another memory flashed, posing for a family photo at a church event. Just before the camera clicked, a hand gripped his shoulder and tugged him out of frame. "We'll take one with you later," someone murmured. That later never happened either. And then the whispered warning in his teens, delivered in the shadow of a church hallway. "Don't make trouble, Malik. You want to have a life in this city. You keep quiet about certain things. Those moments had lived in him like splinters. Tonight, they burned. He pushed away from the table and opened the drawer by the fridge. Out came a battered shoebox. Inside, layers of folded papers, old photographs, and a handful of cassette tapes. He began laying them out on the table. Bank statements from the months after his father's death, empty accounts, property deeds transferred to shell companies tied to the Ellis Group, a crumpled copy of the obituary that named only Darius and Claude as heirs. He dug deeper. Photographs his mother had kept, his father in work clothes, smiling beside a truck, Malik as a child on his father's shoulders, a faded snapshot of the hillside cemetery when the headstone was still new. He made piles, documents, photos, and a small set of witness notes he'd taken years ago after conversations with old neighbors, people who'd whispered about the accident that wasn't an accident. The work was methodical, almost calming. Each piece was a brick in the wall he would build, not to protect himself, but to corner the men who thought they could bury the truth. At midnight, he slid the last photograph into a folder and closed it with a decisive thud. The grief was still there, but it had been joined by something harder, sharper. Determination. If the Ellis name had been used to buy silence, Malik would use it to make noise. And if the city wanted to pretend John Ellis never existed, Malik would make sure they couldn't walk a block without seeing his father's face. He glanced at the clock, then at the folder. This wasn't a fight he could win alone. He needed someone who knew how to drag a buried story into the light. The name came to him quickly. A journalist he'd once met at a community meeting, someone with a reputation for making the powerful sweat. He picked up his phone. Tomorrow, he would call Aisha Grant. By mid-morning, Malik sat in the corner of a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse, folder in front of him, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. The door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and the sharp sound of boots on tile. Aisha Grant spotted him instantly. She was younger than he remembered, mid-20s, maybe, but carried herself like she'd been in the business for decades. Locks pulled into a loose bun, glasses sliding down her nose, a tote bag stuffed with notebooks and a recorder. "Malik Ellis," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You made it sound urgent." "It is." He pushed the folder toward her. "That's 30 years of being erased. I want it stopped." Aisha opened the folder, scanning quickly. Her brows drew together at the bank statements, the council letter, the cemetery photo. "This isn't just a family dispute," she said. "This is a land grab tied to a multi-billion-dollar empire. And the way they cut you out," she looked up, "it's textbook. Systemic. Racially motivated. No question." Malik leaned in. "I'm done whispering about it. I want it out there." Aisha tapped her pen against the table. "If we're doing this, we go big. Council records, property transfers, campaign donations, all of it. And we follow the money until we can put faces to it." They spent the next hours hunched over her laptop, cross-referencing corporate filings with city council minutes. Every trail seemed to loop back to the Ellis Group, through subsidiaries, PAC donations, or development contracts rubber-stamped in closed-door meetings. When they hit a paywall on property records, Aisha smirked and produced a flash drive. "Public access is a myth, but I have friends in the clerk's office." By evening, they had a growing web of names. Developers, council members, even bank executives who'd approved suspicious loans to Darius and Claude. "It's all there," Aisha said, scrolling through the data. "They've been buying silence for decades, charity donations to arts programs, sponsorships for public events, all while pushing through projects that displace communities like yours." Malik felt his jaw tighten. "And my father's grave was just collateral." "They didn't think you'd fight," she said. "They thought they could move a stone and no one would notice. But now, people will." The first post went live the next morning, a carefully crafted article on Aisha's investigative blog, titled "The Erasure of John Ellis: Race, Wealth, and a City Silence." It opened with a photo of Malik at the bare grave site, wind lifting the collar of his coat. By noon, the story had been shared hundreds of times. By evening, thousands. Comments poured in, some outraged, some skeptical. all pushing the conversation into places Malik had never seen before. A local radio station called for an interview, then a podcast, then a community activist group messaged offering legal support. Malik's phone lit up so often he had to silence it. But with the attention came the shadows. An unmarked car idled across from his apartment 2 nights in a row. An anonymous email warned him to drop it before you regret it. When he showed Aisha, she only shrugged. That means we're close. Malik looked at the newest headlines, local news outlets picking up the story, reporters asking the city for comment. The Ellis Group had released a short statement calling the accusations misinformed and personally motivated. The fight was no longer just his. It was public, and now the city was watching. He didn't know if that made him safer, or if it meant the next move from Darius and Claude would be bold enough to happen in the open. The morning air buzzed with the hum of generators and camera crews. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the wind around the cemetery's gate, as if the city wanted to frame the moment like an archaeological discovery. Malik stood just outside the crowd, coat zipped to his chin, hands deep in his pockets. Beside him, Aisha adjusted her camera strap. "They're staging this," she murmured. "Watch how they spin it." He didn't have to wait long. A black SUV rolled up the dirt path, stopping just shy of the bare patch where his father's stone had once stood. 2 workers in neon vests hopped out, maneuvering the granite slab from the back. It looked smaller than he remembered, but maybe that was the effect of being treated like a prop. The mayor arrived next, smiling, waving to the gathered residents and media. Behind him trailed a pair of city council members and a handful of aides. The mayor stepped forward, hands clasped like a benevolent patriarch. "Today," he began, voice amplified by a portable speaker, "we are here to correct a regrettable oversight. The grave of John Ellis, an important figure in our city's history, will be restored to its rightful place." Malik felt the words land hollow. Regrettable oversight, as if the stone had simply wandered off. The workers lowered the headstone into its slot, packing soil around the base while the cameras clicked. The mayor gestured toward it, saying, "We are committed to preserving the dignity of all our citizens, past and present." A reporter shouted, "Wasn't the removal ordered by your office?" The mayor's smile didn't falter. "There were misunderstandings in communication. What matters is that we've acted quickly to make things right." Then he turned toward Malik, extending a hand. "Mr. Ellis, on behalf of the city, we hope this will bring you peace." Malik didn't move. The crowd went still, the air charged with anticipation. Slowly, he let his hands emerge from his pockets, not to take the mayor's hand, but to hold the folder he'd been carrying since that day in Harlan's office. "This," Malik said, voice carrying without a mic, "isn't about peace. It's about memory. It's about the truth you tried to bury." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The mayor's smile thinned. "My father's name," Malik continued, "wasn't just cut from the will. It was cut from the story of this city. This stone doesn't fix that. A staged photo op doesn't fix that. What you did was take from the dead and count on the living to stay silent." Someone in the back clapped once, sharp and loud. Others followed. "I'm not here to shake your hand," Malik said, eyes locked on the mayor. "I'm here to remind you, and everyone watching, that dignity isn't a gift you give us when it's convenient. It's a right, and it doesn't disappear because a name makes you uncomfortable." The applause swelled, joined by shouts of agreement. Aisha moved along the edge of the crowd, capturing every angle. The mayor cleared his throat, motioning for an aide, but Malik spoke over him. "This fight isn't over. I want my father's name in the public record. I want the contracts and deals that stole his land exposed. And I want the city to remember that you don't own our history, you only rent space in it." The wind caught his words and carried them down the hillside. For a moment, the mayor seemed to consider a response. But instead, he turned to the cameras, smiled again, and walked back toward his SUV. The crowd pressed in around Malik, voices offering support, hands gripping his in solidarity. Some were strangers, others neighbors from his childhood, faces he hadn't seen in decades. Aisha leaned close. "You just made their evening news lead." Malik glanced at the restored stone, its gray surface still streaked from the soil. "Good," he said. Now they can't pretend it never happened. But as he looked at the grave, he knew the stone's return was just the first step. The next would be making sure the truth outlived the headlines. Winter had deepened in the months since the staged return of the stone. The headlines had faded, the interviews slowed, and the city had gone back to pretending things were fine. But Malik hadn't stopped. He kept pushing, filing public record requests, meeting with community leaders, speaking at small gatherings where folding chairs scraped on church floors. The fight had shifted from a burst of outrage to a slow, stubborn grind. And in that grind, he'd found a different kind of strength. Now, on a morning glazed with frost, Malik parked his truck at the foot of the hillside. The air was sharp and clean, the kind that stung the lungs and made each breath feel new. He walked the path between the leaning stones, boots crunching over the brittle grass. When he reached the grave, he stopped. The old slab was there, worn but upright, and beside it, a new stone rose from the earth, polished black granite, the kind that caught the morning light. Carved deep into its face were words that could not be erased. John Ellis, 1956 to 1990 father. Builder. Never forgotten. Malik's throat tightened. He reached out and ran his fingertips over the letters, the grooves sharp and certain under his hand. No initials this time. No shortened name. No missing piece. The city hadn't wanted the second stone. They'd argued it was redundant, unnecessary. But the public pressure Aisha's reporting had sparked made them relent. It was a concession, maybe even a political calculation, but Malik didn't care. What mattered was that anyone who came here now would know exactly who lay beneath the soil. He set down a bundle of winter roses at the base of the stones. The petals were deep red, defiant against the frost. "You're here," Malik murmured, "and they can't take you away again." For a moment, the hillside felt warmer, as if the wind had paused to listen. He thought of everything he hadn't inherited, the billions, the buildings, the handshakes that opened every door for his brothers. Those things had seemed like the measure of power when he was younger. Now he understood that power was also in the telling, in the refusal to let the story die. Somewhere behind him, a car door shut. He turned to see Aisha making her way up the path, camera slung over her shoulder. "Thought you'd want this moment on record," she said. Malik smiled faintly. "That's the whole point, isn't it?" She snapped a few photos, wide shots of the two stones together, close-ups of the engraving. "It's not everything," she said, "but it's something. And it's permanent." Malik nodded. "For now, until someone else tries to rewrite it. Then you'll fight again," Aisha said simply. He looked out over the hillside. The town sprawled faintly in the distance, smoke curling from chimneys. Somewhere out there, Darius and Claude were still in their offices, still shaking hands, still building on land that had once been his father's. The difference was, now the silence was broken. And silence, once broken, is hard to put back together. Malik turned back to the grave. "I'll keep going," he said quietly, more to his father than to Aisha. "For you, for anyone they've tried to erase." The winter sun caught on the granite, sending a sharp gleam across the letters. Malik stepped back, hands in his pockets, letting the light carry the name far beyond this hill. Then he walked down the path, leaving the flowers against the black stone, a promise rooted in the frozen ground. This was not the end.